And now the conclusion of Final Destination, Death of the Senses. Chapter 13. The only thing louder than Placido Domingo as he boomed Otello from the expensive loudspeakers in Joshua Cornell III's apartment was Joshua himself, his voice practically a scream over the thunderous music. "You said it was over! You told me that it was fucking over!" "I thought it was," Jack protested. "For God's sake," Amy added angrily, "will you turn that noise down?" The volume was so high that the fallen frame platinum record propped up in front of the large bass speaker was rattling, reflections from the cracked glass dancing across the opposite wall. No way. Joshua took a large mouthful from the glass of red wine he was holding, gulping it down before pacing back and forth in front of his surviving shelves of stereo equipment. "If I'm on death's list, then you know what? Fuck everyone else. If I'm gonna die next, then I'm gonna die doing exactly whatever the fuck I want." "You don't know you're going to die next, Joshua," she said, trying to calm him. "Oh, no?" Joshua jabbed a finger at her. "You alive? Reporter? Dead. Garbage guy? Dead. Katie? Fucking dead. Who's next on the list? Oh, wait, it's me." He swigged the remainder of his wine before snatching up the open bottle from the floor and hastily refilling his glass, spilled drops staining the white carpet. You should put something on those before they stain," Jack offered, lacking anything reassuring to say. Joshua glared at him. "I've got a better idea. How about I let my beneficiaries handle it?" "Joshua," Amy snapped, "this isn't helping. You're not helping. The more panicked you get, the more likely you are going to have an accident." "I'm not panicking," Joshua yelled. "I'm shitting scared." At that moment, the phone rang. He slammed his glass down on the stereo shelves with a clink before striding across the room to snatch up the receiver. "What?" "Yeah, I thought you might be calling, Broats. Now you listen to me. You tell that hatchet-faced old bitch downstairs that she can go fuck herself. Yeah, in those exact words. And if she has any problems with that, then Master Thug's gonna come down there and give her a demonstration." He banged the receiver down so hard that the plastic cracked. Then he grabbed the whole phone and yanked it from its socket, flinging it across the room. "Fuck!" Amy raised an eyebrow. "Feeling better now?" "Not really, no." Joshua stomped over to the window and stared out across the darkening city, breathing heavily, before turning back to Jack and Amy. "Listen, you two. You gotta help me. You gotta keep me alive." "I don't know if we can," said Jack helplessly. "Then you better try, goddammit!" Joshua banged a clenched fist against the wall, leaving a slight dent in the plasterboard beneath the expensive wallpaper. He stared at it for a moment, the pain in his hand bringing him back to a more rational state. "Listen, it's not just me you'd be helping. It'd be you too. You said that after she saved you, then the list started again from the beginning. Then, when you saved her, Katie was next." Jack nodded. "That means after I die, you're next. It's in your best interest to keep me alive, because as long as I stay alive, so do you." He switched his gaze to Amy. "And as long as he's okay, then so are you, see? We need some kind of mutual defense pact." "We can't watch each other's backs 24 hours a day," Jack objected, walking over to Joshua. Past the record producer, through the window, he spotted the moon peeking through the clouds above the buildings across the street, the eye of Artemis still watching the city. How long was that damn thing going to stay full? "What, you got something better to do? Got a clock to punch?" Joshua demanded, voice dripping with sarcasm. "And you," he looked at Amy, "I hear you're not going to be playing Pepper Anderson again anytime soon either." "What?" Amy took an angry step toward him. "How did you find out about that? And I'm not playing anything." She waved a dismissive hand at the platinum record. "At least I'm not a fake." Jack stepped between them. "This isn't helping, all right? Jesus, look, we've got to stay calm. We know whatever it is that's trying to kill us, fate, death, whatever you want to call it. sets up accidents to do it. So we have to be careful and watch out for anything that might cause an accident, okay? How long are we going to have to keep looking over our shoulders? Joshua wanted to know. You know how many different ways there are to get your ass killed? Are we going to have to stay paranoid for the rest of our lives? I don't know. The sight of the moon through the window caught Jack's attention again. Something about it, the full moon. Amy saw his intent expression. Jack, what is it? I'm not sure. What if... He was interrupted by a muffled thumping noise, audible even through the clamor of the opera. They all exchanged nervous glances before Joshua realized what was causing it. I don't fucking believe it, he spat, walking to the center of the room. It's that old bitch downstairs. She's banging on her fucking ceiling, probably using her goddamn broomstick. He stamped hard on the carpet 3 times. Shut the fuck up! You know, said Amy through gritted teeth, if you turn that down, it'd make a hell of a lot easier for us to think in here. Yeah. Joshua waved a dismissive hand and went over to the stereo, turning the volume control even higher. Jack could feel the bass in the pit of his stomach. The window started to shake, vibrating in time to the music. The wine was actually rippling as the glass rattled on the shelf, while on the floor below, the reflections from the cracked glass jittered crazily over the walls. You like that, huh? Joshua demanded of the floor, walking back to the middle of the room. That's not even half of it. Fuck, 11? This goes up to 30. For God's sake, Amy cried, wincing at the noise. I'll turn it down in a minute. I just want to show her that nobody fucks with the master. You know something? I'm not even scared anymore. I'm just fucking mad. He raised his head and shouted up at the ceiling, arms spread wide. Fuck you, Death! Fuck you! His wine glass, which had trembled its way to the edge of the vibrating shelf, tipped over and smashed on top of the big bass speaker. Joshua froze, staring at the sight in horror. Okay, said Amy cautiously after a pause. Let's not piss off Death anymore. Oh-huh? Okay? At least nothing happened this. A wave ran through the pool of red wine on top of the speaker's jet-black wooden case as if blown by a gust of wind, sweeping the liquid over its back. It continued down into the air vents, onto the wiring, the heavy-duty power transformer. With an ear-splitting shriek of feedback, the speaker exploded. The glass and frame of the platinum record blew apart, showering everyone with fragments of debris. The record itself shot across the room. For a moment, Jack thought that it had gone right past Joshua, to embed itself with a loud clunk, 2 inches deep in the far wall like a circular saw blade. Then Joshua's head tilted back. Rather, the lower half tilted back a little. The upper half moved further and kept going. Fine jets of blood sprayed out from severed blood vessels in both halves of the brain as the top of Joshua's skull slid back until it fell from the rest of his body, landing on the carpet with a wet splat, both eyes wide open and staring. The lower part of his face, beneath the almost perfectly straight line sliced from the base of his nose back through his ears, still held an expression of disbelief. Then the body collapsed, pitching forward to land with a dull thump, its half a head landing amongst the smoldering remains of the destroyed loudspeaker and the shattered frame that had once held an accolade to the dead man. The apartment fell silent as the opera came to an end. Amy let out a faint, horrified moan. Jack clutched her, all too horribly aware of the truth of something Joshua had said. With Joshua dead, he was next. What are we doing here? Amy asked, not for the first time. The Gothic facade of St. Vincent's Hospital stabbed upwards at the moonlit sky, its decorative towers and spires striking at the eye of the moon. Jack had barely said a word since they'd left Joshua's apartment. Amy had wanted to stay at the scene of the death and tell the police exactly what had happened, but he'd insisted on leaving and made it clear that he was going to go with or without her. "There's someone I want to see," he said grimly. "Who? Bill, the mortician?" "No, Lonnie." Some of the hospital staff on duty recognized Amy. It didn't take long before she and Jack were able to gain access to one of the wards, despite visiting hours being long over. Other patients' limbs cast in plaster, bandages bound tightly around heads and torsos, watched silently as they made their way to a bed at the far end. Lonnie looked up in surprise when he saw he had visitors. He blinked, almost doing a double take before peering more closely at them. "Jack!" His voice sounded croaky and rusty, as if he hadn't used it for some time. Jack smiled down at him. "Hey, Lonnie." "Jack!" Lonnie looked him up and down, taking in his new clothes, the haircut, the lack of a beard. "What happened to you?" "I've had an interesting couple of days," Jack told him. "Looks like you've had a lucky couple of days. You got a suit. You got a cute new friend." He offered Amy a feeble wave, then grimaced in pain. Jack saw that his chest was bandaged, binding his broken ribs most likely. "I'm guessing you came into some money." "Yeah, Lonnie, I did. That's why I'm here." Jack looked around, spying a notepad and a pen on the cabinet by the next bed. "Do you mind if I borrow a page from that?" The patient, a middle-aged man with one leg in plaster, shrugged. "Go ahead. Not like I'm going to write that great American novel in here." "Thanks." "Jack, what are you doing?" asked Amy. "I need a witness." "To what?" "To this." Jack started writing, reciting each new word as it left the pen. "I, Jack Curtis, being of sound mind." "What?" Amy exclaimed in disbelief. "Jack, what are you doing?" "Exactly what it sounds like. I'm making my will." "You can't be serious, Jack. That's almost like giving up, like you're expecting to be killed." "I'm not planning on dying just yet," he assured her, "and I think I might even have worked out a way that we can stay alive, both of us. But just in case I'm wrong, I want to make sure that at least I won't have died for nothing." He continued writing for a short while longer, then tore the top page from the pad and handed it to Amy. "What do you think? Is it legal?" "New York state law says a will only needs 2 witness signatures from non-beneficiaries to be a valid legal document," Amy told him, her voice briefly turning all business before returning to its previous appalled state. "Jack, are you really sure you want to do this?" He gave her a half smile. "What? You want a bigger share of my estate?" "Jack, this isn't funny." "I know, which is why I'm serious about it." He turned to the patient in the neighboring bed. "You ever witnessed a will?" "Can't say that I have," the man said, intrigued. "You want to?" He shrugged again. "Sure." Lonnie struggled to lift himself off the bed as the other man took the sheet of paper and signed it. "Jack, what the hell are you doing?" Jack leaned down to him, putting a hand on his shoulder. "If I die, you get half of everything I have, which isn't much, I admit, but it's better than nothing. You said you'd been given a second chance. If anything happens to me, this'll help you to take it." "You say that like you're expecting to die," said Lonnie, regarding Jack intently. Jack couldn't meet his gaze. He looked away at the other patients nearby, who were regarding the scene with interest. "Anyone else want to witness a will?" A couple of hands went up. "Jack, this is insane," Amy protested. "And the last few days haven't been?" He shot back, walking to another bed to get a second signature. "Okay, 2 signatures signed and dated. Guess this is legal now." He came back to Lonnie's bedside, folding the piece of paper in 2 and holding it out to Lonnie. "Guess you better take care of that." "Why are you doing this, Jack?" asked Lonnie, reluctantly accepting it. "Because I owe you. You helped me when I most needed it." Jack turned to Amy, taking her hand. "And so did you. So if I don't make it, At least I can pay you back some of what I owe." Amy's eyes glistened, but she managed to hold back any tears. "Jack." He moved closer to her, gently putting his arms around her waist. "But I'm not giving up, Amy. I promise. I don't want to die, and I'm going to do everything I can to avoid it, because Joshua was right. As long as I stay alive, you're safe." Now the tears came. "But how are we going to keep you safe? This thing, whatever it is, it can get at us anywhere, anytime." She nestled her face against Jack's shoulder. He tipped his head and kissed her hair. "I've got an idea about that. I don't know if it'll work, but I've got to try." Blinking away the tears, Amy looked up at him questioningly. "What do you mean?" "I'll show you. We've got to go." Almost unwilling to break the physical connection, he released Amy and turned back to Lonnie. "Lonnie, if I don't see you again, thanks for everything. You just promise me that you'll make the most of your life once you get out of here, okay?" "Okay, friend." Lonnie held out a hand, which Jack shook before bending down to give him a careful hug, trying not to touch his injuries. "Thanks for everything, Lonnie," Jack said. Taking Amy's hand again, he led her out of the ward, giving Lonnie one last look before the door swung shut behind them. Outside on the street, the wind had picked up, the cold cutting through their clothing like blades. There was a taxi rank nearby, a couple of battered yellow cabs waiting at it. Jack hurried toward them. "Jack, wait!" Amy called. "This plan of yours, what is it?" For an answer, he pointed up into the sky at the intense white disk of the moon. "The Eye of Artemis," he said. "Yeah, what about it?" "It's still open, but not for long. How long does a full moon last?" "Technically just one day, I guess, but it looks full for 3 or 4 days altogether. Why?" They reached the cabs, Jack pausing at the rear door of the first car. "Because the killer was going to do all his work while the moon was full, while the eye was wide open." "So?" "So as soon as the moon stops being full, then that means the window of opportunity's closed. Time's up." Amy regarded him incredulously. "That's your idea how to stay alive?" "I know it doesn't sound like much, but I don't know, it just feels right. I can't explain it." She opened the door. "Maybe it is right. I mean, I've seen enough weird shit in the last few days to convince me that there's things we can't explain. But I hate to point this out, Jack. There's a full moon every single month, regular as clockwork." Jack followed her into the back of the cab. "Yeah, I know, that's kind of a problem. But the rest of the time I think we'll be safe. It's only during the full moon that we have to watch out, see?" Amy told the driver to take them back to her apartment. "So fine, most of the time, and then 3 or 4 days a month of mortal terror and death waiting around every corner?" She shook her head helplessly. "I'm not exactly thrilled with that." "Neither am I, but it's better than the alternative." "You seriously think you're right? That once the moon stops being full, we're safe?" Jack leaned over to look out of the window. The moon flickered between the passing skyscrapers as they drove through the city. A faint shadow discernible on the edge of the disk. Darkness starting to obscure the perfect circle of white. An eye closing. "Yeah, I do. If we can just make it through tonight, I think we'll be fine." "Until the next full moon?" Amy reminded him. "At least we know when it's coming. We can take precautions." "So we make a panic room with no sharp objects, no electricity and nothing flammable, and hole up in it for the last 3 or 4 days a month, right?" "Something like that." "So what do we do while we're in there?" "I'm sure we'll think of something." They both managed to smile at that. The glimpses she got of the moon overhead as the cab made its way back to her neighborhood made Amy increasingly uneasy. If Jack was right, that once the moon was no longer full they would be safe, then whatever supernatural force was trying to kill them might well decide to make a concerted attempt before time ran out. And a New York cab, driving through snow-slick streets, was not exactly the safest vehicle on earth. At every single intersection, she found herself checking the other roads for any sign of a truck or bus barreling toward them. They reached her apartment building safely. As she got out of the cab, she spotted the instantly recognizable blue and white livery of an NYPD squad car parked across the street. She didn't need to look through its window to know who was inside. "What are you doing, Pete?" she asked after tapping on the window and waiting for Bereave to wind it down. "I heard about Katie Aston getting whacked, and I know that rapper guy's dead too." "And what do you think I'm doing here, Amy?" Bereave growled. "I wanted to make sure you were okay." He caught sight of Jack behind her and frowned, but said nothing. "I'm fine, Pete, and you don't need to sit around in the cold outside my apartment all night." Bereave gave her an almost expectant look, as if hoping to be invited inside, but his face quickly darkened when Jack, quite deliberately, Amy was sure, reached out and put a hand on her arm. She shot him a warning glance but didn't pull away. "You're not fine," Bereave finally said, seeing the tear in her clothes and the bandage applied by a first aider at the studio, visible beneath. "What the hell happened there?" "Nothing serious. I'll live. Look, I'm okay, really. You don't have to worry about me, Pete." "How can I not, Amy? For Christ's sake, ever since that guy showed up, you've been attacked. You've been involved in all these weird-ass deaths, and now you've been suspended. You need to get as far away from this guy as you can before you throw your life away. Is that what you want?" "Pete," Amy said, part angry, part sad, at the knowledge that she was about to drive the final wedge between herself and her former partner, and mentor, and friend. "The only chance I've got of not throwing my life away is for me to stick with Jack and watch out for him, and have him watch out for me. I don't expect you to understand, Pete, and I'm sorry, but it's what I've got to do." Bereave's voice was stony and emotionless when he said, "I see." "Pete, I'm sorry. I really am." She reached through the window and put her hand on his shoulder. Bereave didn't respond to the touch, staring fixedly ahead. "I'm sorry," she repeated slowly, and then withdrew her hand. "Well then," said Bereave, the muscles around his mouth tight and contained emotion. "I guess that's it." He turned the ignition key, the engine roaring to life and sending clouds of billowing exhaust fumes into the cold New York air. "Pete." "I just hope you're not making a big mistake, Amy. Have a good life." He gunned the engine and the police car pulled away sharply, kicking up a spray of slush in its wake. Amy stood and watched the car head off down the street, feeling a prickling in her eyes that had nothing to do with the stinging fumes swirling around her. Jack stepped up behind her, reaching around to take her hand in his. "Are you okay?" he asked. "I've had better days," she told him over her shoulder, her voice catching slightly. "Come on, let's get inside before the cold kills us." The apartment was warm, welcoming, and Jack thought full of potential dangers as well. A vase holding a couple of flowers could tip over and spill its water onto the back of the TV, causing a deadly short. A tall bookshelf might topple and crush him. A flex running across the floor to the phone could trip him up and pitch him headfirst against the unyielding metal corner of the radiator. Then there were the gas pipes and knives in the kitchen, bleaches and other poisonous cleaning products in the bathroom. The risk of a fire that might spread through the building, trapping him and Amy inside. Stop it, he told himself. There's preparedness and then there's paranoia. Besides, neither of them had seen any signs of danger. That was what they had to watch for. If they saw the signs and they could take precautions, they still had a chance. He had a chance. He was next on the list. As long as he could stay alive, then Amy would be safe. "What are you doing?" Amy asked, eyeing him cautiously as he examined the living room. "Just playing it safe." He moved to the center of the room and slowly turned around to take everything in. Nothing seemed in imminent danger of falling, igniting, or exploding, so he finally sat down on the couch. He peered suspiciously at Amy's tall bird sculpture next to him. Thick, twisted wires with sharply snipped ends, thin, razor-edged sheets of metal over them. "Do you want me to move that?" Amy asked, seeing his dubious expression. It might be a good idea. He gingerly touched the tips of the wires that formed the sculpture's beak. It didn't seem heavy enough to cause any damage if it somehow fell on him, but better safe than dead. Amy picked it up and moved it to one side of the room, putting it down next to a tall lamp. Better? Yeah, thanks. Light from outside attracted his attention, and he got up and went over to the window. Pale moonlight gleamed off the snow coating the building opposite, the moon itself still watching him balefully. He was about to pull the curtains close to block its view when another light, this one down at street level, caught his eye. A patrol car slowly cruising past the building. Had Bereave returned? He couldn't see the driver from his high vantage point. Do you want a coffee or something? Amy asked. The curtains forgotten, he turned to her, deciding not to mention the passing police car. It might not even be Bereave. It's a bit late. It'll keep me up all night. That's kind of what I was hoping for, Amy said with a faint, tired hint of a suggestive grin. After everything that's happened today, I really think we should be together tonight. Well, in that case... Amy smiled and went into the kitchen. Jack, hearing rushing water and various clanks as she filled the kettle and put it on the stove. Suddenly paranoid again, he went into the kitchen after her. What? She asked, concern flashing across her face. Nothing, just checking. Gas, water, something could go wrong. Just being careful. He surveyed the room. The blue flames beneath the kettle were burning normally, the hiss of the gas coming from the burner and nowhere else. There were no precariously balanced objects on top of the cabinets that could fall. The only knives he could see were safely resting blades, first in their wooden block, and Amy showed no inclination toward reaching into the garbage disposal. Jack, Amy chided, everything's okay. Just go and sit down, okay? I'll bring them out when they're ready. Okay. He kissed her, then with a last sidelong glance at the knives, went back into the living room. We need to think about how we're going to take precautions, even if we get through tonight. Amy's voice came from behind him over the slowly rising noise of the kettle reaching a boil. Jack, we're going to get through tonight, okay? I'm not going to let anything happen to you. All right. When we get through tonight, we're going to have to figure out what to do when the next full moon comes around, okay? Well, it sounds like we're going to have to essentially baby-proof the entire apartment. Make sure there's nothing that some bizarre chain of events could hurt us with. The kettle started to whistle. Easier said than done. He got up again and went to the shelves, examining a couple of Amy's smaller sculptures, a stylized cat and mouse of wire and bent copper. Light flickered past them, sending their shadows dancing momentarily across the wall behind the shelves. A large vehicle was rumbling down the street outside, reflections from its lights glancing off the windows of the building opposite. In silhouette, the cat caught the mouse. Was that a sign? Jack spun and, heart suddenly pounding, looked around the room, checking every corner, every cranny for signs of impending danger. The kettle reached a screaming crescendo before abruptly tailing off as Amy lifted it from the stove. Nothing was moving, but he remained still, barely daring to breathe. Jack! When he didn't answer immediately, Amy leaned anxiously over the counter, hunting for him. Jack, what is it? Are you okay? I'm fine, he said, the moment of tension gone. I just thought I saw something, that's all. Was it another sign? I don't know. I don't think so, he admitted. Maybe I'm just a bit jumpy. You're not the only one. Jeez, please don't do that again. I nearly had a heart attack. Amy retreated into the kitchen again as Jack carefully walked around the living room, taking care not to trip on the phone wire, and went back to the window. It had been a garbage truck that had caused the reflection. He wondered if it had been one of Donahue's vehicles and what Dawson's death had meant to the people working for him. Son of a bitch. It had been Bereave's patrol car driving past earlier. Jack remembered the number painted on its roof. He had returned to his parking spot across the street after having apparently circled the block, and Jack could see him sitting inside the car, staring up at the apartment. The guy just couldn't take a hint. Sugar? Huh? Jack answered, distracted. Do you want sugar in your coffee? Yeah, just one, thanks. He pulled back from the window, debating whether or not to tell Amy that Marie was back. He decided against it. She had enough on her mind as it was. Instead, he opted to go and help Amy in the kitchen. He turned around. His foot caught the leg of the craft table by the window. The little brazen torch Amy used for her sculptures wobbled, then fell onto its side. It dropped over the edge of the table. Jack grabbed for it, but a fraction of a second too late. The torch fell to the floor, landing on its trigger with a loud clack, right below to the long curtains. He jumped back from the table, expecting the torch to light, flames to rush up the fabric of the curtains. Nothing happened. The torch came to rest with its nozzle pointing away from anything flammable, inert. Jesus! Amy gasped behind him. Jack realized that he'd almost backed into her as she emerged from the kitchen. Hot coffee spilled over the brims of the mugs in each of her hands. Sorry, he said, indicating the fallen torch. I just knocked into it on the floor and thought it was going to light. Not without a match, Amy said, holding the mugs away from her body as coffee trickled over her hands, dripping onto the floor. Ow, ow, shit! Sorry, Jack said again. Here, let me take 'em. He reached out and gingerly took the hot cups from her hands, putting them on the table in front of the couch. Are you okay? She waggled her fingers, her nose scrunching in slight distaste. Yeah, just a bit sticky, that's all. Let me go and rinse this off. She went back into the kitchen as Jack picked up the falling brazen torch, giving it a careful check to make sure that it wasn't damaged or leaking before putting it back on Amy's craft table. Well, away from the sides. God, he really was on edge. His heart was absolutely racing, the surge of fear-driven adrenaline still churning in his stomach. Okay, calm down. Nothing had happened. He was still safe. For the moment. The glimpse of light in the corner of his eye reminded him that he was still under silent observation by the full moon. Not after tonight, he told himself. He still couldn't explain it, even to himself, but he was more sure than ever that surviving the night would give him and Amy a reprieve from the lurking threat that had been stalking them. Even if it was only temporary, it would still give them time to devise a proper plan, to work out how to stay alive until the next full moon came around. For now, though, he was sick of the damn thing watching him. Jack went to the window, about to pull the curtain shut and block out the world beyond, when Amy came back from the kitchen. Hey, she said, smiling. Hey, Jack smiled back. Amy walked around the couch toward him. She stepped on a puddle of spilled coffee, the individual drops having somehow pulled together on the polished wooden floorboards. With a yelp of surprise, Amy fell forward as her foot slipped out from beneath her. She crashed into the lamp, knocking it over and breaking the bulb, and let out a startled little gasp as she landed. Her hands clutched weakly at something underneath her. Jack hurried from the window to help her, turning her over. Amy, are you He stopped, horrified. Amy had fallen on her bird sculpture, and the pointed beak was now embedded deep in her chest, right over her heart. Dark blood was gushing freely from the wound. She struggled to say something, her eyes wide with pain and fear. Jack stared at her as the blood ran down her side, pulling on the wooden floor. No! He gasped, paralyzed with helpless disbelief. This couldn't be happening. No, it's not your turn. It's meant to be me next. It's meant to be me. She managed to lift one hand to the sculpture. The wires twisted and bent. Get it out! He snapped out of his paralysis and took hold of the sculpture around its elongated neck, trying to pull it away without hurting Amy. It didn't move. He pulled harder. Amy screamed. Some of the wires twisted and squashed together in his hand as he tightened his grip, but the sharp metal of the beak stayed put. The tip of the beak was bent inside of her, he realized, hooked around her ribs. He had to get the thing free, or there would be no way for him to hold in the blood pumping from the open wound. Jack shifted his grip. holding the beak itself. The razor edges of the thin copper plating around it sliced into his flesh of his hand, but he ignored the pain. Amy's eyes were now filled with terror, desperation. "Amy!" he cried. Her gaze flicked to him. "Amy, look at me. Just hold on, please. Hold on." One hand pushing down against her collarbone, he tightened his hold on the sculpture, feeling his own blood oozing over his skin, and pulled. With an almost animalistic groan of strained metal, the beak ripped free of Amy's chest. Torn, wet strands of skin still impaled on the mangled tips of the wires. A gush of hot blood sprayed from the wound into Jack's face. Amy convulsed beneath him, letting out a piercing shriek of agony. Shocked, Jack wiped the blood from his eyes before hurriedly pressing the flat of his uninjured hand down onto the pumping wound. He looked around desperately for the phone, knowing that if he didn't call 911 and get Amy to a hospital fast, she was going to die. But she couldn't die. Not before him. He hadn't done anything to cheat death again, so he was still meant to be next. The phone was on the small table at the far end of the couch, out of reach. If he took his hand off the wound, blood would spurt from it, each beat of her heart draining her life away onto the floor of her apartment. But if he didn't, she would die anyway. It would just take longer. The phone wire running across the floor behind the couch disappeared under a small rug. Maybe he could hook it with something. The sculpture. He grabbed it by the base of its legs, his hands stinging as the cuts touched the blackened metal. Still trying to keep his other hand firmly pressed down against Amy's chest, Jack jabbed the now flattened and deformed piece of art in the direction of the phone. If he could hook the cable and pull the phone off the table, maybe even just stab the tip of the beak into the rug and drag the whole goddamn thing toward him. The beak banged down against the floorboards, catching nothing. He was just inches short. He tried again, feeling wetness well up beneath his hand as he inadvertently eased the pressure on the wound. Amy gasped. "Come on," Jack said desperately as he clawed for the wire. "Come on!" It was no good. It remained just out of his reach, a mere finger's length beyond the reach of the blood-slicked sculpture. But it might as well have been a mile. "Jack!" Amy's voice was no more than a trembling, pleading whisper. He dropped the metal bird and moved back to her, grasping her hand. Tears were welling in her dark eyes. "I don't want to die." "You can't die!" Jack's own vision blurred with tears. "You can't! It's not your turn! It's supposed to be me!" The apartment door flew open with a bang, wood splintering from the frame around the lock. Jack snapped his head around to see Bereaved burst into the room, his gun held in both hands ahead of him. The cop's face was full of frantic worry, which changed to a twisted snarl of pure hate when his eyes fixed on Jack, crouching over the blood-covered form of Amy. "Get off of her, you motherfucker!" "Pete, no," Amy tried to say, but her voice was too weak for Bereaved to hear even if he had been listening. Bereaved fired. Jack felt as though someone had smashed him in the chest with the spike of a pickaxe. 1, 2, 3 burning red-hot spikes of agony, slamming him backwards. He crashed down on his back, the crack as his skull hit the floorboards, nothing compared to the unimaginable pain searing through his body. His ears were ringing with the sound of the shots, nostrils filled with the acrid stench of burned gunpowder. The metallic taste of blood welled in his mouth. Every nerve was on fire, the pain overwhelming. Above him through the window, he saw the cold white disk of the moon casting its unearthly light onto him. Time seemed to speed up as darkness closed in around the edges of Jack's vision. He could hear Bereaved's voice, but the words were echoing, meaningless. He wanted nothing more than to turn his head, to look at Amy one last time, but he couldn't move. The last thing he saw was a shadow, a perfect black arc, sweeping across the face of the moon. The eye of Artemis closed, the full moon finally over. The end. Okay, guys, this has been Final Destination, Death of the Senses, an amazing novel by Andy McDermott. It is such a shame that this book was only released for a very short time and then was recalled because of the typo on the spine. I gotta tell you guys, going into this book, my expectations were not super high. This channel is mostly a slasher novel channel. Freddy, Jason, Chucky, stuff like that. Michael Myers. I'd always planned on doing the Final Destination books. I'd always planned on doing them later, once I got through the slashers. But this book, Death of the Senses, was the hardest one to find. I thought I would never find a copy. So when a subscriber to the channel reached out to me and got me this book, just so I can narrate it for the channel, I had to do it. I had to do it then and there, and I am so glad I did. Thank you, DK, aka True Resident Evil. Thank you so much. I've already said this in a bunch, but I can't say it enough. Thank you. This book has been an absolute pleasure to narrate for the channel. I am so happy that it is on the channel now, and I'm just so happy that this book is going to, the audio version I've made, will be available for all the people that want this book but cannot find a copy of it because it's so rare. I'm glad that I've made it available to the masses. And I hope I've done a decent job bringing this book to life for all of you. From the very beginning of the book, I really did connect with Jack as a main character for the book. I felt for the guy. I was rooting for him the entire time. I had this gut feeling from the first time that Bereaved looked at Jack and the way he talked about him and the way he arrested him and then the interrogation. I had this small gut feeling that he was going to kill Jack before the book was over. And I was like, I'm going to be so mad if that happens. If he kills Jack, I'm going to be so mad. But the way he did it actually makes sense. He didn't kill him in cold blood. He killed him because he thought Jack was actually hurting his partner, Amy. So I'm pleased with okay, it's Final Destination. If you've seen the movies, nobody survives. I think there was one movie where, I think it was part 2, I believe, where the two people actually lived. But there was actually a deleted scene in part 3 that explained that they actually died. But that scene got deleted, so out of all the movies, only 2 people supposedly survived. So I didn't fully expect Jack and Amy to pull through, but the fact that they did die the way it went down was very much like the end of a Final Destination movie. Perfect. The entire book, for that matter, was great. It was very cinematic. The writing was spectacular. I could really see it all play out in my head, which made it so much easier for me to try to bring it to life for you guys. I just wish my voice acting was a little better. I know my Jack New York accent couldn't have been that great, but thank you for bearing with me through it. And yeah, guys, I don't know what else I can say about this book. It was very well done. The guy really knew his source material for Final Destination. Yeah, I loved it. Out of 1 through 10, I give this book like an 8. Because there were a few little things. I thought the book dragged on in parts. I know that's not the author's fault. Black Flame, when these books were being published, demanded at least 400 pages. So I get that he had to, do some filler, but really there wasn't a whole lot of filler. And if not for that, I think this book could have been a 300-page book, a 250-page book, and been just as good, if not better, because the filler would be gone. But really, that's my only complaint for this book. I think all the characters were done fabulously. They each had such great stories. They were fleshed out. Even the characters that you didn't get a lot of backstory for, you knew the characters, you felt for them. Some of them you didn't care if they died or not, but at least you knew them. Somebody liked them or something. It was easy to put a face to them and a voice to them. It was so easy for me to put a voice to them. It just clicked. And so the filler was my only complaint in the whole book. I thought the deaths were done great. Every death scene was fantastic. They brought in William Bloodworth. the mortician from Final Destination 1 and 2 and Final Destination 5. Tony Todd, his character was so spooky in those movies, and I was so glad to see him brought into this book. I mean, you know what? I'm going to say I give this book a 9 out of 10 just because of that addition. Andy McDermott really outdone himself with this book, guys, and I hope you all enjoyed it. Let me know in the comments section below what you thought of this book as a whole. I'd really like to hear from you guys and discuss this great book with you. I'm going to do a version of this entire book where I'm going to edit out my commentary from the first 12 chapters, and I'm going to edit all 13 chapters into an unabridged audiobook of this book. I'll release that in the next couple of days. And then I'm going to get started on The Mask of Jason Voorhees by William Pattison, a.k.a. Eric Morris. Until then, guys, this has been your friendly neighborhood 80s slasher librarian saying, thanks for listening, and y'all be careful now.